paying people to leave town.
Question number 11, Dr David Clark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health and asks, does he stand by his statement about the authors of the People's Mental Health Report, they're very left-wing, anti-government protesters? If not, when will he apologise to the 500 people who wrote their stories about experiences with the mental health system as part of the report?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Yes, and my statement distinguished between the genuinely motivated story submitters and those action station organisers with some political agenda. My quote was, "When you look at the people behind it, you know they're very left-wing anti-government protesters. As I say, Action Station is back on Thursday with another separate anti-government protest within the health area, and they could be back week after week with different topics." And just for the record, Mr Speaker, the Action Station campaign coordinator is Mr Rick Zwan, the Green Party Wellington election campaign coordinator who used to work as Kennedy Graham's researcher.
Supplementary.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Has he read the report?
Order. Order. I've asked for less interjection from everybody so that Dr David Clark can ask us supplementary questions.
He carries on. Has he read the report? And if so, does he accept that its aim, as recorded in the executive summary, is to give space to the stories of what was really going on and going wrong in our mental health services?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Yes, Mr Speaker, I have read the report, and especially the executive summary, the first line of which is a totally false premise. It talks about $140 million being cut from health funding. Well, actually, health funding's gone up by $300 million, which kind of proves the point that this is a political document.
Its aim. Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Does he think the contribution of Robbie, who describes support services as expensive and inadequate, which he says, quote, almost drove him to take his own life, end quote, should be dismissed as the experience of a left-wing anti-government campaigner?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
I've already answered that. Look, I think Robbie's experience is worth listening to, but that does not change the fact that this is produced by a group of people who are permanent anti-government protesters. If the member doesn't believe me, go and look at their website. They'll be back here week after week on subject after subject after subject because they don't like the government.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Does he think the contribution of Mike King, who, quote, describes despair and hopelessness in the face of inadequate access to mental health services, end quote, should be dismissed as the experience of a left-wing anti-government campaigner?
Look,
the Honourable Dr Jonathan
Look, I think the member needs to speak to Mrs King about how you think on your feet. I've answered that question already. The organisers are Action Station, and they are the permanent anti-government left-wing protesters. Mr King is a very good man, Mike King, as opposed to Mrs Annette King, who is genuinely motivated, and I don't detract from his efforts, but as I say, when you have people like Mr Rick Swan and his friends from the Green Party, who used to work for Kennedy Graham, I think it's pretty obvious this is political.
Supplementary.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Does he think the contribution of, quote, the many parents who submitted in regard of their children's experience of huge waiting lists and lack of funding, end quote, should be dismissed as the experience of a left-wing anti-government campaign?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan.
I put out to the member he doesn't have to take all his supplementaries, and if he can't think of new material in response to the answers, he should just stop.
Order. Order. We'll deal with them one at a time. Point of order. Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, for two answers in a row, the Minister began by insulting the questioner rather than addressing the question. But the main substantive point, Mr Speaker, is that despite the abuse in that last answer, he didn't even address the question that was asked.
On this occasion, order. I have been increasingly worried about the interchange between these two members and some of the answers that have been given on occasion by the Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman. But on this occasion, when I consider the three questions that were asked, they were effectively the same question each time, and therefore I can understand the frustration of the Minister in having answered the question the first time, he effectively gets the same question for the next two occasions. Point of order, I will hear from Dr David Clark.
Sir, that question, in my view, was not addressed because he had talked about Action Station, which is the author of the compilers of the report. I'm asking the specific question about the comments within the report from the parents, and that is a very specific and non-politically loaded question, sir.
And I'd like to assist the member, but when I consider the answer that was given to, I think, the second supplementary question, that effectively was an answer that was then quite suitable for the rest of the questions the member asked it, which was that effectively just drawing on the experience of someone else within the book. And the Minister was quite clear in saying he's not in any way critical of the experiences that were detailed in the report. He was certainly critical of the authors who put the report together. Point, I will hear from the Honourable David Parker.
Well, with respect, sir, isn't the problem with that is that the Minister tries to write off this as being a left-wing conspiracy. That's the essence of his answer. And I think it's quite proper for members of the opposition to put instance after instance after instance that paint a different picture. And I think the Minister should have to address each of those instances, sir, rather than just cast aside a political insult telling him he should learn how to ask different questions.
I don't agree that it was a political insult. The question was answered. There was no attack on the various contributions that were made within that report by the Minister. There was certainly a feeling that the authors were not of the same political persuasion as the Minister. That's acceptable.
To clarify, is the Minister agree that waiting lists and lack of funding...
Order. Would the member please resume his seat? Order. Would the member please resume his seat? I have ruled on that matter. The member has now starting to challenge the chair and debate the chair. That in itself will lead to gross disorder in this House. Question number 12, Melissa Lee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order, order, order. If I hear a further interjection while I'm in the chair today from Carmel Sepuloni, she will be leaving the chamber. She's been consistently interjecting throughout question time, and a very order. The member wants to go now. I can make those arrangements very easily. I expect cooperation, particularly for whips, and the level of interjection that's been coming from Carmel Sepuloni throughout question time is unacceptable. And when I rise to my feet for those interjections still to continue is just not acceptable to this House. Question number 12, Melissa Lee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.